My name is Mike, and this is my testimony. So I was born into a fairly normal family, mom, dad, brother, sister. My dad was an alcoholic, but it was nothing crazy. It was just kind of life as we knew it until I was about 5 when my parents divorced. And a few years into that, we went to go visit my mom for the weekend, and she was gone. No note, no phone call, nothing. She had left her apartment and nobody had any idea where she was at. So I was 7, I had an older brother who was 10, and my younger sister was 5 at that time. Left with a single father who was an alcoholic, who had a whole slew of issues, but it all seemed fairly normal to us. I increasingly would begin to hang out with worse and worse crowds. So by the time I was 10, I had a criminal record that could have ruined me. One night my dad nearly drank himself to death. His heart quit beating. We called 911, and his heart quit beating again about a dozen times before the ambulance even got there. He ended up getting rushed to the ER, had a blood alcohol level of 0.38%, something like that. They said he should have died. His blood pressure was near 200. It was insane. And as a 10-year-old kid, I just remember walking out into the parking lot, looking up into the sky, and just saying, "Why, God? Why are you allowing this to happen?" I didn't know anything about God at the time, but I felt like He owed me some answers, and so little did I know He had a plan. He did use that instance to kind of wake my dad up. He did get sober from that for a little while. And through a series of events, my dad ended up moving us from Kansas up to Minnesota, where my aunt and uncle lived. And we moved in with them for about 9 months. And my uncle was a pastor. That whole family, they were all Christian. They all went to church. And so I got 9 months of being discipled by my uncle. Every night we'd read devotions. We'd go to church every Sunday. And I very quickly knew all the Sunday school answers. I knew that I needed to give my life to Jesus. I knew that I needed to ask Him for forgiveness for my sins. I knew I needed to have a relationship with Him. All this stuff I knew, but it didn't click until one day during worship. I'm just staring at everyone, watching at them worship, and my uncle comes up behind me. And he puts his hand on my shoulder, and all he says is, when I worship the Lord, I like to close my eyes so that I can focus on Him and not everything else. And in that moment, it clicked that this wasn't some, imaginary God up in the clouds that we were singing to. This was a real living God that we were worshiping, and He deserved my worship. And I remember I just broke down crying because all of the verbiage began to make sense at that point. This Jesus who I needed to give my life to, who I needed to repent of my sins, was real. And so not long after that, I gave my life to Christ. And then a few weeks after that, I ended up getting baptized to, give that public declaration that this is a new me. And so not long after that, we only lived up there about 9 months, and we came back to Kansas. We found a church. I immediately got plugged into the youth group, and from the age of 13 until I was out of high school, that was my life. I was at that church every time the doors were open. We were there. My whole life was in church at that point. That was also where in high school I met a girl. Her name is Stephanie, and we started dating. She went to college, and I joined the Air Force. I worked while she finished college, and then she went to school for teaching, and then she got a job after that, and when she was done with school, we got married, moved to Wichita because that's where she got a job, and she taught for about 4 years, and we started having kids. We knew we wanted to adopt, so we went through the foster care process and got our license. But then she got pregnant again, so we held off on getting any foster kids. But then, and many of you have heard this story, but we were not looking for foster kids, and my wife found them in some park. And that whole story is just a series of events that has just God's sovereignty written all over it. Fast forward to I had been in the Air Force for about 10 years. I decided at a certain point, well, if I'm going to stay in the Air Force, I'm going to become a chaplain, or I'm just not I'm going to get out. And so I started going back to school. 2015, I graduated seminary, and it took a few years. So in July of 2018, I finally got to become an Air Force chaplain. That was kind of the beginning of a whole nother series of adventures. I've gotten to laugh with people, cry with people. I've been involved with and done multiple memorials for airmen who I either knew through association or was actually counseling them, who ended up taking their life. And that's always hard. I don't really know what to say other than God has used all of those situations to prepare me and build me into who He needed me to be for His service. I deployed a few years ago, and right before my deployment, I had a guy who I had been counseling for about 7 months ended up taking his life. But I got a call one day from his wife that he had taken off into the woods near their house on foot, and so I got in the car and rushed up there, and I searched that night and didn't find him, and then I met her back at their house the next morning and made sure he wasn't in the house, and so I searched the wooded areas again, but this time I took another chaplain with me and went just about 30 yards further than I went the night before and found his body over in a field. He had taken his life, and the police were going to kind of mess up the death notification to his wife, and so I asked them if I could tell her, and so I met her back at the house, and I felt like I just ripped her whole world apart, and I know that it wasn't me, but you couldn't have told me any different at that time. I felt 100% responsible for the fact that I couldn't fix him. I couldn't get him past his issue. I didn't know what to say to his wife. I had nothing. He had 2 young boys. I had no words for them either. I'm not usually at a loss for words, but I felt completely powerless in that situation. In ministry, you always think that if you point people toward truth, that there'll always be happy ending, that everything will turn out just perfect. But as far as I can see, the only purpose for me in this guy's life just happens to be the ultimate one, in that I got to make sure that he truly was saved. I don't know what it looked like the moment he stood before God. I have no idea. I almost didn't. I was scheduled to deploy that year. This was 2021, and my commander almost didn't let me deploy. He thought maybe it was too much, too fast, but I talked him into letting me deploy, and I'm glad I did, because I had always said that I knew I was called to ministry, but I always thought I was called to a Pauline type of ministry where it would always be bivocational, and I never wanted to be paid by a church. However, as a deployed chaplain, you're always given a service, and so I was given the prime time 11 o'clock Sunday morning contemporary and Protestant service. And so for the first time in my life, I got to preach every single week. I got to build and lead a worship team. I got to watch them develop. I got to pour into a congregation for 6 months and lead them. And by the end of the deployment, I had so many people telling me that I needed to be in full-time ministry. I thought maybe I should pay attention to that. Maybe I should take that as somewhat of a confirmation. And so when I got back, I was kind of at an all-time low. I thought I was getting kicked out of the Air Force. That's a whole nother story. And as a deployed chaplain, there's always someone in need. And so you kind of ride this high of just pouring into people and being exhausted all the time, but feeling so rewarded because you know that the work you're doing is good. To coming home, not knowing what my future in the Air Force looked like, feeling like I had just failed, feeling like I was about to give up a 14-year career, 15-year career. And I don't know, I knew that God was calling me into full-time ministry, but I didn't know what I had left to pour into anyone. And then I see this ad for a worship and media director, Glen Park Church. And so I was like, well, I'll throw in my resume. So I applied for the position. I found out later that Pete saw it and thought, what's an Air Force chaplain going to want to do, working with us, and almost threw away my resume. But he reached out shortly after and met with him, and God just began opening door after door after door after door. And eventually I took the position under the understanding that God was calling me to be a pastor, and so I didn't just want to be a worship or media director, that I wanted to have the opportunity to pour into people. And so Pastor Pete agreed, and so I came here. But I'm not going to lie to you, when I first came to Glen Park, I was kind of at an all-time low. I don't know, I couldn't really explain it, but I was struggling, adjusting, coming home from deployment. I have never felt that kind of unexplainable, just lack of energy, lack of desire to do anything. But very quickly, God began showing me my purpose here. If I were to be truly honest, I think I can say that God used Glen Park to save me from possibly the darkest moment in my life. I found so much family here. I've made new friends. And God is doing great things here. God is reaching into people's lives at the darkest moments of their life and pulling them into the light. And we get to see it every single week. So when I stand on that stage on Sunday and I look out into the congregation and I catch eyes with each individual person, it's like each one of you means something different to me. Each one of you fill a different place in my heart. And all I can think is that 10-year-old boy looking up into the sky saying, God, why me? Why are you doing this? And he has shown me one thing after another, even in the pain of life, that he has a purpose and that it's not without meaning. It's not without merit, but he is doing something in the pain of life. And it's all for his glory. My name is Mike, and this is my testimony.